If you could spend a moment with some remarkable people and discover what their life sounds like, what would you ask? Welcome to Are We On Air? An audio encounter. I'm Naféei, and each episode will feature one conversation with an inspiring friend of mine who will share with us the soundtrack to their life. Welcome back to another episode of Are We On Air? For this week, we have a slightly different format. I had the honor to interview the legendary conductor that is ZUBIN MEHTA. Mr. Mehta kindly invited me to his home here in Los Angeles, which, hands down, has been the most beautiful house I've ever seen. A mixture between Tuscany and India, and oozing with cultural sophistication. I used this chance to listen and learn from one of the greatest music directors of our time. And I'd like to dedicate this episode to my uncle and my mother, who had introduced me to classical music and Mr. Mehta's work at a very young age, and for that I'm eternally grateful for. I hope you'll enjoy it. For this week, it's an absolute honor to be here in Los Angeles at the maestro's house, ZUBIN MEHTA. Welcome, Mr. Mehta.
Thank you very much for having me. Let's begin.
Let's begin. So the purpose of this interview series is to kind of create a picture through a couple of songs and music of your life and your life's work. And what's your earliest significant musical memory that shaped you as an artist?
Well, I come from a musical home. My father was a very fine musician, a violinist, concert violinist. He was first concertmaster of the Bombay Symphony, which he founded. And then he went to New York immediately after the war ended and studied for 4 years in New York with Ivan Galamian, a great violin teacher of Itzhak Perlman and Pinchas Zuckerman, etc. And he came back and had a sort of a career in India as a soloist. And I grew up with him in my home. He was teaching, he played quartets, he trained the orchestra, sections of the orchestra would come to our house and he would train them. So I had music in my home. And then I started playing piano since I was 5 years old. And in the beginning, I was supposed to have a career in medical sciences, which my parents chose for me. And then I soon found out after 1 year in college, in university in Bombay, that this was not for me. And I spoke to my father and he agreed. And so at the age of 18, I went to Vienna to study, eventually to become a conductor. I didn't know it would happen as fast as it did. I had a cousin there who was studying piano at the Vienna Academy, and through him I got to know Vienna, and the musical life of Vienna was so concentrated, even in 1954, that after my studies all day at the academy, in the evening, every evening I would go to a concert or opera, always in the Stehplatz, the standing room. And in those days, there was not so much travel, so the great musicians were all in the city. So I would hear operas conducted by Karl Böhm, Herbert von Karajan, Joseph Krips, concerts by Raphael Kubelik, Dimitri Mitropoulos. The greatest musicians in those days were going in and out of Vienna, but mostly staying in Vienna. So I was just completely ensconced, surrounded by music also. Won my first competition in Liverpool, which gave me my first job. as assistant conductor of the Royal Liverpool Philharmonic. It was in 1959. And after that, things started. I went to Tanglewood, which is the summer school of the Boston Symphony, and there I won a prize with Claudio Abbado, with whom then I continued my studies in Vienna. Got my first opportunities to conduct through the Jeunesse Musicale, which was an organization of music through Europe, started in Belgium. And I got my first conducting experiences in Vienna, conducting for this organization. And from that, I started substituting for great conductors in Vienna, in Zagreb, in Milan, and Israel was my first big experience musically, substituting for Eugene Ormandy, and etc. So it started.
Yeah. What piece of music or song would you choose for your time in Vienna that stuck with you to kind of symbolize that period?
Well, I suppose The Marriage of Figaro, but the works of Bruckner I started first studying in Vienna. And my first big recording with the Vienna Philharmonic was the Bruckner Ninth Symphony.
Well, you mentioned the Israeli Philharmonic, where you the music director of for 42 years.
Well, that was my first big substitution. And immediately after that, also for Eugene Ormandy, I jumped in Vienna with the Vienna Philharmonic 2 months later.
Wow.
So those were two great opportunities. And you know, in our profession, one gets opportunities. But if that doesn't go well, you don't get called back. But I had the fortune that the Israel Philharmonic called me back immediately, and so did the Vienna Philharmonic. My first regular conducting job without being a substitute was Berlin Philharmonic. And I have not been very enthusiastic about guest conducting.
Why is that?
Well, I prefer to stay with my orchestras, and I was immediately offered a job in Montreal as a result of my debut concert in Philadelphia, and also in 1961. And then immediately I jumped in for Fritz Reiner with the Los Angeles Philharmonic, and they invited me back. So from 62, I was with the Montreal Symphony as music director and also Los Angeles Philharmonic. And since I had these two great orchestras to stay and build up my repertoire and, you know, contribute whatever I could to them, I had no interest in guest conducting. But I went every year to Vienna and Berlin. That I've never given up.
Just to quickly go back to the Israel Philharmonic, and you mentioned the other orchestras that you were conducting. What made the what sound would you describe, or how was it different?
Well, whatever orchestra I was music director, my axiom, my inspiration was always Vienna, where I grew up, and where I had the sound of the Vienna Philharmonic in my ear until today, all my life. So that is a sound I try to emulate in Israel and also in Los Angeles. But I never insisted that all the repertoire should be played with the Viennese sound only. In other words, when we did the music of France, I never insisted on as warm a sound as the Vienna Philharmonic produces, even for Debussy. The transparency of the music of Debussy and Ravel, I try to develop also in Israel and in Los Angeles. But my repertoire is, I suppose, 80% Vienna.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the sound I strived for with both orchestras. I also convinced some of the musicians in Los Angeles to change their instruments.
Oh.
So that for German repertoire, for Viennese repertoire, we used Viennese trumpets and Viennese clarinet for everything. The American oboe was so beautiful that I kept that. I didn't try to change that, etc. And I spent wonderful years, 7 years in Montreal and 16 years with the Los Angeles Philharmonic.
And you were the youngest music director here at the
Yes,
LA Phil.
I was the youngest. And we did many tours, and from about 1966, we started making 3 or 4 long-playing records for Decca.
Do you have a favorite of those records?
Well, yes, we did a lot of Richard Strauss. One of my favorite recordings there would be the Sinfonia Domestica, which is even today not played too often. Not many conductors really either know it or appreciate it.
Talking about Los Angeles, I find it fascinating how, if you compare LA to the other big metropoles of the world, it feels like a slightly isolated island culturally, but also in one way it's one of its capitals for classical music, especially through the movie industry.
But I don't take the credit of putting Los Angeles on the map at all, musically speaking. Before me was a great conductor, Edward van Beinum, who worked wonderfully with the orchestra. And of course, during the war years and just before was the era of Otto Klemperer. Now, these two gentlemen didn't really build the orchestra to the virtuosity and the fame it has today, but they brought in a lot of music that was unknown to Los Angeles in those days. That means Mahler and Bruckner and Klemperer did a lot of contemporary music. He brought in Alban Berg and Schoenberg, etc. We must not forget that Schoenberg lived in Los Angeles.
Just like Stravinsky and
Schoenberg and Stravinsky, the two giants of the 20th century, lived. Schoenberg till the end of his days in Los Angeles. In fact, he lived around the corner from me. Yes.
Why is that Los Angeles has this draw, including yourself, like from Korngold to Stravinsky, Schoenberg? Why are these
Well,
greats?
there are different reasons. Korngold would have stayed in Vienna, but political circumstances forced him to emigrate, as did a lot of great movie composers. They were all quite established in Europe, but they had to come to Los Angeles. And Los Angeles is a place where people, especially Europeans, come and don't want to leave because of the weather, because of the people in Los Angeles, very friendly, very neighborly. It's not like the aggression of New York. So people feel very comfortable here. And Hindemith lived here, taught outside San Francisco. Of course, Schoenberg, and then the great writers, Thomas Mann, Feuchtwanger, they all stayed here. Bruno Walter lived here. Mahler's widow came here with her latest husband. And so in the 50s and 60s, then of course the great artists, Ryasha Heifetz, Rubinstein, Gregor Piatigorsky, the great cellist, they all lived here and they loved it. Some of them went back to Europe, some of them never did. Heifetz and Piatigorsky lived here always. And I had the great fortune when we opened the Music Center, Los Angeles. Heifetz was our first soloist.
Oh, wow.
It was the first and only time I had the honor to accompany him.
Is there a recording of this?
Yes, but I don't have it. Somebody...
Maybe I can find it.
You know, in those days, you couldn't go with a little telephone and record things. It was 1964.
A lot of you have waited patiently a number of years for this occasion tonight. Myself, in my brief tenure of 3 years, I could hardly have waited for tonight. But I don't think any of you in your most fantastic dreams could ever imagine this would happen.
Obviously, the movie industry provided a lot of opportunity and as a platform for classical musicians as well.
Yes, but the orchestra, which I took over in 1962, was a very fine orchestra already. They had great woodwind and brass soloists. The strings were not as adapted and virtuoso as they are today, but that had to be built up. You know, with the union rules, you can't just change musicians as you feel like. You can't do, and that's correct also. So it takes time to build up a string section. And so I was here 16 years, and I loved every concert, and we did many tours. I took the orchestra on a State Department tour. In those days, the State Department in Washington exported temporarily great American orchestras, because that's what America had to show culturally that could go on tour. You know, America has the finest museums, but they don't go on tour. So we went on a world tour in 1967, a 9-week tour,
Wow.
starting in Europe and ending in Hong Kong. First time I went back to my country with an orchestra, which I was very proud to do, to Bombay and Delhi. We played for Mrs. Gandhi. So I was very happy here. And then in 13 years in New York was a different experience. Artistically very high. The orchestra was already one of the world's great orchestras when I took it over. So I didn't have too much building to do there. 82 musicians were brought into the Los Angeles Philharmonic.
Wow.
And only 2 were fired. And in New York, in the 13 years I was there, we brought in 50 new musicians. But of course, we played many concerts. You know, I can't tell you how many concerts in 16 years in Los Angeles, but over 1,100 concerts in New York in 13 years, and also many tours.
Does the touring, obviously classical musicians tour a lot, does it have an effect on their sound, the way they play? Is
Yeah,
it
that's
good
a
or
very
bad?
important question. It gives a flexibility that you don't get just by playing a couple of concerts every week with different programs in the city. In Los Angeles, we repeated every program at least 4 times. But then we took it out of town, Santa Barbara, San Diego. We even had a series in Santa Monica. So those repetitions gave the orchestra a permanent repertoire. In New York, we played every concert 4 times. But then we went on tours to South America, to Europe, to East Asia, also with the New York Philharmonic to India. So I had a wonderful time with both these orchestras also.
Well, we also have to mention, of course, I mean, in US basketball, as a reference, you have the dream team. In the classical world, there was the 3 tenors. Domingo, Carreras, and Pavarotti, and you, for the first 3 legendary concerts. What was it like rehearsing and performing among these greats, but also in front of performing in front of 1.3 billion viewers?
All these 3 tenors were great friends of mine.
Yes.
So it was not that we just came together for the first time. The reason for the concert in Rome was the welcoming back of Jose Carreras, who was out of the music circuit for a few years because of his leukemia. And he was cured, he came back to sing, and this was a concert to welcome him. And since all 3 of them loved football so much, we decided to have it on the night before the finals, so that we would do the concert and the next day we would all go to the finals in Rome. And it was just a wonderful working atmosphere. All 3 of them were great pals. There was no professional jealousy amongst them at all. There's such a big repertoire to choose from. Each one chose what arias they wanted to do. And then it was my idea that these 3 should sing together. But there is no opera, either in the Romantic or Baroque repertoire, where 3 tenors sing anything together. So we asked, at my suggestion, Lalo Schifrin, who's a great film composer and a great artist himself, and each tenor gave their favorite popular songs, and he put this medley together that all 3 sang. And this was a great success, of course. And then they sang O Sole Mio together also, etc. And it was the first time for a world public that Luciano sang Nessun Dorma from Turandot. And that became almost the Italian national anthem.
That's so true.
But it was a wonderful way to give a concert. We just didn't know that they would sell about 15 or 20 million records, from which we got nothing.
That's insane.
No, because we all signed a deal with Decca that the expenses they told us would be so high that there would be nothing left to divide amongst the four of us. We were all idiots. Because from 14 or 15 million records, I'm sure they would have spared us a few pennies.
Did you have which one was your favorite from those 3 that you conducted? The most special, basically, to you personally?
Well, Carrera sang Granada, which was just wonderful.
Granada, tierra soñada por mí. Mi cantar se vuelve gitano cuando es para ti. Mi cantar hecho de fantasía. Mi cantar flor de melancolía.
And Luciano, the Nessun Dorma. And you can choose anything of Plácido's. Absolutely one of the greatest singing artists of our time.
Svani per sempre il sogno mio d'amore, l'ora è fuggita e voglia disperata, e voglia disperata, e
We briefly mentioned India, your background, and you were very close friends with Ravi Shankar.
Yes.
Yeah. Do you have a memory that you cherish the most with him?
Well, I got to know the great Pandit Ravi Shankar through his recordings. It was not later in Los Angeles that I met him, because he was a very prolific concert artist in the West. And he came to Los Angeles. He had the great tabla player Allah Rakha that went on tour with him. And I introduced them to a few great jazz drummers. And when these jazz drummers in Los Angeles heard Allah Rakha play, they were stupefied. They couldn't imagine such rhythms. rhythms that you can't write down in our system also. So Raviji and I became great friends since then. And then when I was in New York, I asked him to write his second sitar concerto, which he did. And we world premiered it in New York. And after that, he performed it in London and Paris with me, with the Paris and London orchestras. And we took it to India on a tour with the European Youth Orchestra, where we played it in Bombay and Calcutta, etc. And we were very close until the end. And I'm so pleased that now his daughter, Anushka, plays this concerto with me. And she has played it in Berlin, Los Angeles.
I've seen her actually here at the Los Angeles Phil when she was performing a year or 2 years ago.
Yeah.
That was great.
Then next year will be the 100th anniversary of Raviji's birth, and she will perform it with me in London again.
Oh, wow.
I look so much forward to that. She's a wonderful artist and as great a human being as her father was.
Do you personally have a favorite composer or a piece of music?
No.
That's impossible.
The repertoire that we have to conduct. You know, when I first came to Los Angeles, there were so many great works that I conducted for the first time. And my point is that I used to do 16 weeks of subscription concerts in Los Angeles. And every week had to be a new program. And I didn't repeat a single piece for at least the first 4 years. So you can imagine how many works I had to study. Some of them I knew already, having conducted them in Montreal or a little bit in Israel. But mostly Los Angeles was where I did a lot of repertoire for the first time. So there's no way I can choose a favorite.
Would you or the orchestra get tired after a while of a certain piece of music or a composer and you have to take a break?
Because when we talk of classics, you never get tired of it. Every time you discover something new. And besides, I didn't repeat the pieces that much. The guest conductors would come and do their favorite pieces. So the orchestra, especially in Los Angeles, even when I arrived, had a huge repertoire that they had, because don't forget they play at the Hollywood Bowl 2 classical concerts a week for I don't know how many weeks. The orchestra is extremely adept, also playing under various conductors.
I mean, the current one, Gustavo Dudamel.
No, but after me, the great Carlo Maria Giulini took over for about 5 years. Then Andre Previn came. After that, Salonen was here even longer than I did. I was 16 years. I think he did 17 or 18 years. And after that, Gustavo has taken over, Dudamel, and he works very well with the orchestra. Recently, we did a concert for the 100th anniversary of the orchestra, and all 3 of us conducted.
Wow.
It was a great pleasure.
this episode's playlist, visit areweonair.com, where you'll be able to enjoy the full playlist mentioned in this conversation.